Well, good afternoon, and thank you for those kind words of introduction, though I'm sorry you spilt the beans about the 9 children that early on. Anyway, it's a really great honour for me to be here. I had the privilege of listening to Tanny Gray-Thompson just a moment ago. I know I've got a hard act to follow, but I'm truly humbled and honoured to be part of your centenary celebrations. Now, there obviously has been quite an ebbing and flowing over, I think I should describe it as your first 100 years, shouldn't I? In terms of how the world for women has moved on, and sometimes we've seen progress and then other times walked backwards. I believe that the pace of change has already picked up irreversibly in the past very few years. I want to talk about why I think it's happened, why I think it's irreversible, and why I'm so optimistic about the future for our daughters. Now, before I do that, I've got to take a bit of a reality check, though. I've just only got 3 slides. But I did want to show you, I don't believe that everything is all achieved just yet anyway. Now, this is a chart or a pie graph showing in the US, there are more men named John, Robert, William or James on the boards of US companies than there are women with all the names. So got a little bit of progress still to go before we can claim victory. And then, of course, in the UK, well, in fact, since this chart was done at the end of last year, 2 more women have been appointed as CEOs or chairs of some of our largest companies, the FTSE. But if you have the name, if you're a man with the name John, you know, obviously you do rather better. And the best ticket to success in this country seems to be knighted by the Queen, because then you have 19 such men who've got that honour. So I'm realistic, we're not quite there yet. But my final chart before I just talk shows that actually we have registered a significant change in the last 4 years. The 30% Club started in 2010 when there were just over 12% women represented on the boards of Britain's largest 100 companies. And you fast forward 4 years, we've still got a way before we hit the 30%, but we've almost doubled that percentage. And importantly, there are now absolutely no all-male boards in the FTSE. And you can imagine just how fierce the competition was not to be that very last one. And then if you look at the companies a bit smaller in size, the 250, the next 250 by size, when the 30% Club started, over half of them had what I would describe as women-free zone boards, and now that is down to 23. Still 23 too many, but you can just see in quite a short pace of time, really in the history of businesses and organizations, there has been a lot of progress. Now, I believe this is just the tip of the iceberg, and I believe that the most exciting thing around this has been a real change in mindset, so that in this country at least, this issue, and obviously boards are just symbolic, it's not the whole story, but this issue is now seen as everybody's issue. It's not seen as a women's issue. It's not seen as a special interest issue. And again, that's a very big shift in the psychology around this topic in quite a short space of time. And the very exciting thing, and obviously I'm speaking to an audience of women, and I'm very, very supportive of the idea of having women's networks. I think it's a hugely empowering and important thing. But we couldn't have done it on our own, this particular advance. We've needed to have men, those in power, those leading companies, to be advocating for women to join at the top of their organizations. And in effect, this has been, to borrow Emma Watson's phrase, he for she in action. Okay, so how did this all come about? Well, to be honest, the 30% Club was born out of frustration. It was born out of frustration that all the efforts to date, at least, hadn't been working. Like many women, when I joined the world of work, in my case, a big fund management company in the city, I thought that the world was one of equal opportunities. I thought that how far you could progress depended very much on your ability and your dedication, how hard you worked. So I was very disappointed, and in fact it was very overt in my case to find that my gender was an issue. So when I had the first of, obviously what was then the first of many, didn't quite know that at the time, but anyway, first of many children, I found myself passed over for promotion when I came back from maternity leave. Now I was quite young, I was 25. This was not a big deal promotion, this was literally the first rung on the ladder. So it was hugely disappointing to me when I came back and I asked my boss, I didn't get the promotion I was expecting, and I said, well, what should I do to improve? And he basically said, well, there's some doubt over your commitment because you just had a baby. Now, no one would say that these days, obviously, but although I was very disappointed, at least I knew where I stood. Now, the expression hadn't been invented then, the expression lean in, but I guess with hindsight, that's precisely what I did. I worked harder, I took every opportunity that came my way, and in fact, I decided, I was the only woman in a team of 16 at that employer, and I decided to leave that one and to go to a more entrepreneurial, smaller company. I also carried on having more children, obviously. Didn't have to state that point. And actually, just 6 years, as already been outlined, after I joined that second company, I was given the wholly unexpected opportunity to become the chief executive. And by then I had, my husband and I had 5 children. I was 35 years old, and the youngest had just had their first, second, and third birthdays. So this was quite a full-on time in my life. And also, of course, I was there, I was running money on a desk, and suddenly I was being asked to run the company. I had no management training, I had no leadership experience, and so to be honest, this wasn't so much leaning in as diving in head first. But anyway, I took the opportunity, and I'm still here. That's the good news. And as well as having now 9 children, 6 girls and 3 boys, whose ages range from 6 to 23. The company has gone from running, Newton has gone from running about £20 billion of pension and charity money to over £50 billion. Now, I've been somewhat lucky with my choices. I obviously, as already been mentioned, have a very supportive husband. I'm not actually that brilliantly well organised, I have to confess. Sorry to burst that bubble. I have to be to a point, but you also have to live with happy chaos when you have 9 children. Anyway, I also had the good fortune, to be doing a career where results, the actual performance of the funds and then the actual performance of the business speak louder than the hours spent at my desk. So I've been able to combine those two things. But of course, you have to work very hard to get the results. And I guess for the first 15 years of my career, I just, as well as bringing out the family, obviously, focused my attention at work on delivering those results. But of course, I gradually became aware that younger women were coming up to me and asking for advice on how to combine a family with a career. And of course, I wanted to do something to help. I wanted to ensure that their path was a little easier than mine. I feel I owe a great debt to the generation of women who've gone before me, and I wanted to help. So like many others have done, I set up a women's development network within the company. And to be honest, the feedback was phenomenal. Everyone said fantastic events. We always invited men so that they could get a sense of some of the issues. And by all normal measures, it was a success. And everyone said how inspiring, to use your own important word today. But of course, in this case, it didn't really inspire anyone to do anything. Because I looked around the rooms, the committees that I sat on, the management meetings, and I was still often the only woman in the room. So I became a bit disillusioned, to be honest. And then I was invited to a lunch at another firm. Quite a lot of different types of organizations there. Again, it was men and women. And as I listened, I realized that lots of people were working very hard to try to improve the proportion of women coming through their organizations. And yet we all had very little to show for it in terms of results. So of course, when you have so much effort and so little to show for it, I realized we must be doing something wrong. And as I thought about it and I started to read very widely on the topic, I realized that we were probably lacking at least 2 things. And later on, I realized there was a third. One was that we needed a measurable goal with a defined timetable. There's been a lot of action, a lot of talk over many, many years about equal opportunities, and obviously there have been great strides. But you need to set a sense of urgency. We can't keep talking about it forever and ever. I'm not in favor of legislation to get the results, and I think that the results that we've already seen in this country show that businesses can do this for themselves, and people are understanding how important it is to develop all their talent, and not just because they're told to do that. But we need a number and we need a deadline, and that's where the 30% piece came from. That's, incidentally, the critical mass point. That's when, if you're one of 3 women out of 10, then people hear you as a person. They don't hear you as the woman or as the token woman. And then we need to involve those in power more. And that's why the men are so important, because of course those running companies and big organizations in this country are so often men. And I approached a couple that I knew quite well. One at least I know has a daughter, and I think that influenced him. But both of them said it was, I shall name them, it was Sir Roger Carr, who was then chairman of Centrica and is now chairman of BAE Systems, and Sir Win Bischoff, who was chair of Lloyds Banking Group. And both of them said immediately, they didn't need any persuasion, they said, yes, we're so frustrated by the difficulty we find in finding great women to join our boards, but when they do join, they make a phenomenally positive contribution, and would love to help you get to a better result in terms of the gender balance. So the 30% Club launched in November 2010. We just had 7 founding chairman supporters. And to be honest, a lot of people were quite negative about it. But actually have come a long way, and we've sort of shifted the norm. So now it seems that it's a bit odd if you're not supportive of this. The third ingredient, which again I mentioned I wasn't sure about at the time, but now recognize as pretty important, we was also very collaborative. And we also were, frankly, quite, as one newspaper put it, quite vague about how we were going to get our results. Now that might sound like a negative thing, but actually it meant that we listened, that we took in what people felt was lacking, what they felt needed to happen to change things. We didn't impose our own view on things. And that approach meant that we were also able to evolve as we did get some momentum and as things started to happen. And we're also not territorial. In this collaboration, we're not trying to own this space. We're not trying to create some sort of business out of it. This is just a group of people who are absolutely determined to see change. And that approach, I think, has helped to create some joined-up thinking around lots of fantastic initiatives that were already happening, but needed to be brought together. So fast forward now for 5 years almost since we launched, and the 30% Club has become quite a big organization. We now have, it's not just around the boardroom, most of our efforts are really focused on bringing through talent, female talent, right the way through from the schoolroom to the boardroom. So for example, this year we launched a collaboration with a fantastic organization set up by the BBC economics editor, Robert Peston. It's called Speakers for Schools. You may have come across it, and it offers free talks in state schools. So the 30% Club chairman, about 25 of them, in January talked at schools up and down the country, trying to encourage girls to consider a wide range of career choices, and importantly as well, trying to make sure that boys understand the importance of gender equality as well. And I myself taught at one school that was a girls' school until sixth form, and then it became mixed, and one school that was a boys' school until sixth form, and then became mixed. Very interesting to see how often these things haven't really been thought about, and how even at that young age, obviously, people are forming opinions about both their own aptitudes and what they might achieve in life, and also those of colleagues and peers. We also, I have to take one moment because I've become very fixated about this, all starting very young in life. And of course I have enough of a sample size in my own family to make some judgments about this. But I've also become quite passionate about the need for girls to be given opportunities around team sports. It was fascinating hearing Tani. I actually have the privilege of speaking with her in a couple of weeks as well, where we are talking about the sporting world. But I've realized, really from watching my own children as much as anything, that once girls hit particularly the public examination years, then often they get very few chances to play team sports. And I realized that some of the life skills, of course, that you pick up from being part of a team, being depended upon, depending on others, understanding how to overcome the pain of defeat and savor the joy of victory, really important in terms of precursors to the skills that you need in the workplace. And it's one reason why my company, Newton, sponsored the women's boat race between Oxford and Cambridge universities. And perhaps some of you saw it this year in April. It was the very first time that the women rowed on the same day over the same course on the Tideway, and was covered by the BBC. And that took 186 years since the men first rowed. So suddenly, over a short space of time, again, we started sponsoring that in 2010. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that has, alongside this effort around women in business, sort of had quite a sharp acceleration in the pace of change. And I guess it leaves me very hopeful that we don't need to extrapolate the past necessarily, but sometimes you can see more optimistically a big leap. Back to the 30% Club. It's now become quite a global approach. This idea of men and women working together to affect change and being led by people who are running things and not really coming up from pressure at the bottom, but really because the business leaders accept and really want change. There are now 30% clubs in the US. The founding chairman there is someone called Peter Grauer, who is chairman of Bloomberg. And we have a fantastic list of initial supporters: Sheryl Sandberg, Warren Buffett, Larry Fink, who runs BlackRock, a huge asset management firm there, all supporters. We have 30% clubs in Ireland, in Malaysia, it's quite an eclectic group of countries, Australia, South Africa, and shortly going to launch in Canada, Italy, and the Gulf Cooperation countries, where of course they have very different cultural issues. And I guess the approach of having this joined up continuum of change from schoolroom to boardroom, men and women working together, very collaborative with existing initiative on the ground, really seems to be creating some acceleration in the pace of change globally. Now, all that's very well, but to be honest, now I get onto the main bit, because the biggest learning for me has been something a little bit, I suppose, deeper than just creating change in the boardroom. I've realized actually this has become more of a microcosm for a whole shift in the way that the world is moving. And I believe very passionately now that the world is becoming a more feminine place, that we have a great opportunity ahead. Now, one of the reasons, of course, is, well, not necessarily of course, but one of the phenomena behind this is globalization, and another is technology. And where am I going with this? Don't worry, it'll all be revealed. Both of those trends, which are absolutely indisputable, are enabling us to change the way we work, and also changing the way that companies value different types of talent. So first of all, obviously, my generation has really worked the same way as our parents did. We've done the daily commute, we sit at the same desk every day, and really we use technology more in terms of once we get to work, rather than rethinking how we make a contribution from any place, any time, anywhere in the world. And that, I think, is a big opportunity. But also, these two big trends are meaning that there's an erosion of power that comes from a sort of command and control sense, that people are realizing now that you can't so much tell people what to do in an age when you have huge social media. I know you're on Twitter today, but you know, the influence can be gained by anybody. We saw that a little bit in the run-up to the general election, when suddenly we have many more local parties, smaller parties, all participating in the TV debates. The results weren't quite reflective of that because of our electoral system, perhaps, but you saw much more of a free-flowing set of ideas. It's much harder for anybody, as I say, to lead from the top down. You have to build a network. You have to build a community. Now, men and women are hardwired a bit differently, and it's not just stereotyping. Neuroscience suggests very firmly that women are programmed more naturally to be empathetic, to like to build consensus, to not rush in to try to create confrontation and win in an argument. We want to bring people with us. And of course, men can acquire those skills, and some men are naturally like that as well. But it's I think, very much my experience in many different situations, and I think resonates probably with many people. That's just sort of how we are. And it means that companies are now, instead of thinking, well, women behave a bit differently, and that's a little bit of how do we fit that in with the rest, they're now pretty desperate, to be honest, to work out how to make sure that those qualities in women are then brought into all levels of their organizations. And this is a particularly exciting moment, because I feel, even though I do feel certainly very proud of the family, and I feel, very happy with my lot in life, very delighted that I'm running a big company and enjoying that, but I don't necessarily feel that I'm a template for other women necessarily, or younger women coming through. I feel I was I've been a transitional person, really, because I've sometimes had to get that seat at the table, I've had to fit in with the status quo. I've had to sort of make compromises and learn when to make a different point of view. Whereas I think my daughters, our daughters, will have and granddaughters will have the opportunity and need to be themselves at work. Companies want them to bring themselves, their qualities, to the workplace or to any organization that they're in, because they need those networking skills, they need those relationship building skills. And that's a pretty exciting development. And I think really that's sort of where we're at in terms of the thinking, it's certainly in the business community, around why it's important that women and young women are brought through the ranks. So I think where we really touched on with the 30% Club, but perhaps not really realizing it, back in 2010, was the chairman supporters who led the way, who really got the thing going. Really, they were early adopters of, and they realized that they were missing out on something in the boardroom by not having enough women, as they put it. They perhaps wouldn't have expressed it in terms of, masculine and feminine energies complementing each other. That might have seemed a bit new agey for them. But I think that that's where people have suddenly realized we need to get to for the next generation and to make our businesses, but also our society better. Because, of course, if you've got a better balance of men and women at all organization levels, then the women will have more of a say. And I believe that we will help to create more human organizations that really are in tune with how people want to behave and think, and are less being told what to do. Now, that's a whole long way from the idea of putting a few more women on corporate boards, but is the true story of the 30% Club. Thank you.